for the speakers. Okay, but we have two young, bright scholars to keep us engaged, and the topics on which they are going to be talking about is also internal challenges to India's national security, which is Naxalism and the insurgencies in the northeast. Right? तर आत्ताचे आपले जे सगळ्यात ज्वलंत विषय आहेत भारताच्या राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षिततेच्या संदर्भात यावर अतिशय अभ्यासपूर्ण भाष्य करणारे आपले दोन्ही आजचे दुपारचे वक्ते आहेत. सो आय एम शुअर लाईक यू हॅड अ वंडरफुल सेशन इन द मॉर्निंग. दुपारचंही सेशन तेवढंच आपल्या सर्वांना खूप काही जास्त चांगलं आपल्या ह्या विषयाच्या संदर्भात सांगून जाणार आहे. राईट, सो थँक्यू ऑल. अँड कॅन यू जस्ट शिफ्ट अ बिट दिस साईड, थोडंसं पुढं आलं तर बरं पडेल, सो दॅट दोज हू कम लेटर कॅन sit. Thank you. Just a little bit, please.
I'm requesting everybody to please be seated. And please keep your phones on silent. A very warm and scholarly afternoon to all the respected dignitaries, guests, faculty, and the students present over here. Today, we embark on a journey of knowledge and valuable learning. Where perspectives will unfold, minds will engage, and exchange will prevail. I'm Mansi Younger, your anchor for the afternoon proceeding, and I feel immensely privileged to welcome each one of you in our second session of today, that is NEETIKUSHAL 2024, themed India's National Security. Please put your round of applause for our guest. Please join me in welcoming our guests, Dr. Gayatri ma'am and Akshay Ranade sir. Their accomplishment and expertise will definitely bring a wealth of knowledge to our gathering today. I encourage all the students to embrace this opportunity for intellectual exploration and enrichment. It's an honor to express our gratitude. Here we have a memento, a token of appreciation for our honorable guest. I hereby request Professor Sanjot ma'am to kindly present these gestures of goodwill to our dignitaries. Without further ado, I would like to call Dhanashri to introduce Dr. Gayatri ma'am. I would like to call upon Malhar to introduce Professor Akshay Ranade sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Akshay Ranade sir on this special occasion. Akshay sir is an assistant professor of politics and international relations at Symbiosis International University, Pune. He has completed his MPhil at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He is also the founder of Mimasa Foundation for Indic Studies. Sir has co-edited the celebrated book Grace, Glory and Gaffe, India's Defense and Security at the rate 75 with Professor Uttara Sahastrabuddhe. Sir has also contributed a chapter in the book Narendra Modi, Shaping of the New World Order. His articles are frequently published on several platforms. Sir has recently submitted his doctoral thesis titled Dynamics of Coalitions Government and Making of Security Policy in India, a study from 1978 to 2014. It is privilege to hear from you an important internal security issue like Naxalism. I now request Akshay sir to take charge.
Hello, good afternoon. At the outset, let me first thank Akshay ma'am, Department of Political Science, SP College for again inviting me to your NEETIKUSHAL event. I remember being here a couple of years back. I genuinely was very thrilled to be part of this event once again. Last time I spoke on foreign policy, this time I'm speaking on internal security. So this time I'm speaking on internal security. My topic is Naxalism and Maoism. Well, I generally prefer term Maoism more, and I'll come to it why. But I want to begin. आपण कदाचित वाचलं असेल. Recently, Amit Shah, our Home Minister, made a very interesting comment. He said that we are going to completely eradicate left-wing extremism in 2 years. This is what 2 वर्षात आपण माओवादाचा पूर्णपणे नायनाट करू शकू अशा प्रकारची स्थिती आज आलेली असं अमित शाह म्हणाले. He said this I think somewhere in October, November. And this gives me an interesting entry point to our discussion today. आज मी जे बोलणार आहे मला एक बऱ्यापैकी त्याची पार्श्वभूमी मिळाली because this comment is encouraging as well as slightly problematic. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, encouraging primarily because obviously it gives a sense of hope that we have developed to an extent that we can at least talk about eliminating Maoism in next 2 years. म्हणजे आता बऱ्यापैकी आपली परिस्थिती अशी आहे की माओवादाला आपण 2 वर्षात पूर्णपणे संपवू शकू असं. When a Minister of Home Affairs is saying that means he's saying from a position of authority. So it generally gives us some kind of a hope there. And if you look at the statistics, obviously we have reached there. I mean, I was just going through the Ministry of Home Affairs annual reports, and it says की 2010 मध्ये जेव्हा माओवादाचा विषय सगळ्यात जास्त होता तेव्हापासून ते आजपर्यंत almost 77% decline in the Maoist related violence. So I mean 2010 मध्ये when I hope you remember our Prime Minister then Manmohan Singh had said that Maoism, or he said left-wing extremism. Left-wing extremism is an official term. म्हणजे तुम्ही जर का मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ होम अफेअर्सच्या वेबसाईटवर गेला तर तिथे तुम्हाला लेफ्ट-विंग एक्स्ट्रीमिझम नावाचं सेपरेट पोर्टल मिळतो वेअर ऑल द इन्फॉर्मेशन रिगार्डिंग माओइझम इज कोलेटेड अँड डिसेमिनेटेड. सो 2010 मध्ये मनमोहन सिंग म्हणाले होते की Maoism or left-wing extremism is the single biggest internal security threat for India, surpassing the terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir or insurgency in Northeast, something that we will be discussing today. The Maoism is even more a problematic threat. So 2010 मध्ये जो सगळ्यात मोठा threat होता तो now it has come down to we can eliminate it in 2 years. That means there has been a substantial development on that account. तिकडे मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ होम अफेअर्स एक इंटरेस्टिंग स्टॅटिस्टिक्स वापरते ज्याला म्हणतात की लेफ्ट विंग एक्स्ट्रीमिझम अफेक्टेड डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स. सो दे आयडेंटिफाय द डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स. एक रेड कॉरिडॉर, if you see there's a red corridor which is generally demarcated as the districts which were affected by Maoism. And if you compare the statistics of 2010 and today, there is a reduction in the left-wing extremism affected districts also. So right now it is bare minimum. I think it's barely 10 to 20 most affected districts, and then there are sparsely affected, which is in any way going to be for foreseeable future. So statistically, there is a lot of development, and obviously I'm a student of this subject, so I can only access the information which is publicly available. When Ministry of Home Affairs is making a statement, he has access to intelligence reports, state reports, so on and so forth, so probably his assessment is based on that, which is why it is a slightly encouraging statement. But it is also slightly problematic, and this is where I'm going to base my, and this is what I want to submit for all your consideration, that this should not lead to any complacency regarding our response to Maoism whatsoever. Primarily because the threat of Maoism is slightly different than your conventional threats. I mean, it's not as if, for instance, Jammu Kashmir मध्ये स्थानिक कुठला तरी मुद्दा आहे, someone wants a separate state there, if you address that issue, you can solve it. Or in case of Northeast, some ethnic groups are demanding certain political rights, and then if you solve that, then the issue may get solved. Maoism is not like that. Maoism is an ideological threat. As long as there is one ideological individual who wants to attain the objective, we'll come to what it is in a moment, this threat is going to be there in one form or the other. So, and more importantly, तुम्ही बघितलं नाही आता 1967-68च्या काळात नक्सलिझमचा शब्द नक्षलवाडीवरून येतो, जिथे ते पहिल्यांदा तो उठाव झाला. आणि the reason why I don't prefer Naxalism because the idea of Maoism predates Naxalbari revolt, and it is going to continue as long as that ideology remains. So Maoism as a term captures the ideological foundation, and Maoism as a term also captures the political objectives they are fighting for. Which is why Maoism, as long as those political objectives are met, the fight or struggle is going to go. आणि आपण बघितलं 67 पासून हा त्याच्यापूर्वी पण तेलंगणामध्ये अशा प्रकारचा रिव्होल्ट झाला होता, पण कॉलोनियल स्टेट आणि त्याच्यामुळे आपण स्वातंत्र्य काळामध्ये पहिला मोठा उठाव जो झाला तो 67 मध्ये नक्षलवाडीमध्ये झाला. आणि तेव्हापासून माओवादाचा प्रश्न आजही अबाधित आहे. पण इफ यू लुक ॲट द हिस्ट्री, देर इज ऑलवेज दिस प्रॉब्लेम हॅज वॅक्स्ड अँड वेन. म्हणजे 67 ते 75 पर्यंत हा मोठ्या प्रमाणात वाढला, मग त्याचा परत प्रभाव कमी झाला, 90च्या दशकात परत वाढला, मग तो परत कमी झाला, 2004 मध्ये तो परत. सो इट वॅक्स अँड वेन्स इन हिस्ट्री, अँड दिस इज नॉट ॲक्सिडेंटल. म्हणजे ॲक्सिडेंटली होत नाही. दिस इज वॉट माओइस्ट say that this is what their strategy is. Maoists say that the might of Indian state is too strong. To fight Indian state is not an easy task. So there is going to be a time when we will have to lie down, we will be docile, and when we regain the strength, we are going to come back with vengeance. So we should, आज त्याची परिस्थिती बऱ्यापैकी चांगली जरी असली तरी इतिहास आपल्याला दाखवतो की असं मागे पण झालेलं आहे, तो परत हा उठाव होऊ शकतो. म्हणून the reason why I said that this could be slightly problematic also because this should not be that temporal decline. It should not be something that, okay, we are rejoicing too early. But then, why is this a peculiar threat? What I'm going to do today is, by profession I teach, so I don't want to get into a teaching mode directly, but I can't escape it here because there's going to be some theoretical foundation of it that is necessary to understand this threat. So kindly bear with me, there's going to be certain jargons and certain theoretical concepts that will flow in, so I'll have to make you aware of that. पण हा विशिष्ट प्रकार आपण माओवादाला स्वतंत्र वेगळ्या पद्धतीचं थ्रेट का बरं म्हणायचं? मनमोहन सिंगांना असं का वाटलं की हा सगळ्यात मोठा इंटरनल सिक्युरिटी थ्रेट आहे? तर त्याचा एक मटेरियल डायमेन्शन आहे इन टर्म्स ऑफ माओवादी किती आहे, ते किती व्हायलन्स करतायत. देर इज अ मटेरियल डायमेन्शन टू इट, अँड देन देर इज अन आयडिएशनल डायमेन्शन. त्याच्या मागची विचारधारा काय आहे, आणि ती जर विचारधारा प्रॉब्लेमॅटिक असेल तर विचारधारेला आपण कसं प्रत्युत्तर द्यायचं, याला जोपर्यंत याला कॉम्प्रिहेन्सिव्हली आपण रिस्पॉन्ड करत नाही, दॅट थ्रेट इज गोइंग टू रिमेन वेअर इट इज. आणि I am a student of security studies. I mean, you can study Maoism from various sister disciplines. You can see it from the socio-political angle, you can see it from the anthropological angle, so on and so forth. I am primarily looking at it from the perspective of security studies. So, what I am going to focus on is how it presents a threat to Indian state. And त्याच्यामध्ये जर का आपण बघितलं तर there are two ways you can analyze it. What are the objectives of Maoism and how they seek to attain those. माओवादींना नेमकं हवं काय आणि how are they going to go about it? These are two very fundamental questions. And once we answer that, I think the gravity of that threat will be apparent to all of us. आपल्या पॉप्युलर डिस्कोर्समध्ये, आय डोंट वॉन्ट टू बी पॉलिटिकली करेक्ट एनिवे, बट आपल्या पॉप्युलर डिस्कोर्समध्ये एक प्रकारचं रोमॅन्टिसायझिंग असतं अबाउट माओइझम. यू नो दॅट दे आर फायटिंग फॉर द अंडर प्रिव्हिलेज, दे आर फायटिंग फॉर लँडलेस लेबरर्स, आणि they are fighting for caste operations and so forth. My personal submission is this: none of this is true. Are they fighting against state operation? No. Are they fighting for people to safeguard themselves from, let's say, caste operation? No. I mean, if they were fighting against state operation, the first thing the Maoists should do is to dissociate themselves from that ideology, because history tells us whenever this ideology has been experimented, it has resulted into one of the most oppressive totalitarian states we have seen, whether it is Soviet Union or China today. So जर का त्यांना स्टेट ऑपरेशनला रिस्पॉन्ड करायचं तर सगळ्यात पहिलं म्हणजे त्यांनी माओवादापासून लांब जायला हवं. But we don't see that is happening. So they are not, of course, this doesn't mean that state operation doesn't exist or there are no caste problems. These problems very much are alive, but the answer to this is not Maoism. And Maoists are using these fault lines to perpetuate a political program to overthrow Indian state. So their final objective is to overthrow the Indian state. Not because it is oppressive, not because it has certain problems, but because the nature of state according to Maoist is illegitimate. And भारतीय लोकशाही ही माओवाद्यांना मान्य नाही. तुम्ही भारतीय लोकशाहीमध्ये किती बदल का करणार, त्या तशा प्रकारची लोकशाहीच मुळात माओवाद्यांना कुठल्याही प्रकारच्या माओवाद्यांना मान्य नाही आहे. म्हणून जोपर्यंत ती लोकशाही आपण बदलत नाही, त्या लोकशाहीचं स्वरूप आपण बदलत नाही, तोपर्यंत माओवाद्यांचा हा जो काही संघर्ष नाही, ते संघर्ष म्हणतात पण हा एक प्रकारचा आतंकवाद आहे. तो संघर्ष जोपर्यंत चालू राहील, जोपर्यंत भारतीय व्यवस्था बदलत नाही तोपर्यंत. म्हणून इट्स नॉट अबाउट ॲड्रेसिंग अ थीमॅटिक इश्यू, इट्स नॉट अबाउट ॲड्रेसिंग स्टेट ऑपरेशन, it's about addressing, according to them, the fundamental problem of Indian democracy. So as long as there is an Indian democracy, there is a parliament. In fact, and again, this is the second part of romanticism is, लोक म्हणतात माओवाद्यांनी शस्त्र घेतलेली आहेत ॲज अ लास्ट रिसॉर्ट, दॅट दे यूज व्हायलन्स ॲज अ लास्ट रिसॉर्ट. कारण मुळात त्यांच्याकडे दुसरा पर्याय नसतो. लोक इतके शोषित आहेत की त्यांच्याकडे पर्यायच नाही आहे दुसरा. काही प्रमाणात खरं असेल. आय एम नॉट जनरलायझिंग हिअर, आय एम जस्ट गोइंग बाय द बुक. अँड द बुक आय मीन this is something which Maoists have written. One thing Maoists do fortunately is that all their documents are freely available. They are not at all hesitant about saying त्यांना काय हवंय. ते उघडपणे म्हणतात की आम्हाला लोकशाही मान्य नाही, ते उघडपणे म्हणतात की आम्हाला ही लोकशाही पालथून लावायची आहे. सो about their fundamentals, Maoists are very clear. There is some confusion in civil society about what they trying to do. But तो एक आणखी romanticism असतं की they are using violence as a last resort. त्यांच्याकडे पर्याय नसल्यामुळे ते violence वापरतात. But that is again not true. In fact, violence and use of violence is central in the political objective and strategies of Maoists. In fact, कदाचित तुम्ही नाव ऐकलं असेल, वरवरा राव. He became very famous recently because of the ongoing Koregaon Bhima case. He was earlier, he is now associated, he is right now I think out on medical bail. He was earlier associated with People's War Group, which is a designated Maoist organization. Now he is part of, I think, Revolutionary Writers Association. आणि 1990च्या काळातलं त्यांचे क्रेडिटवरती मुलाखत झालेली आहे, ती ऑनलाईन आपण बघू शकता. म्हणजे त्यातलं एक छोटंसं वाक्य मी तुम्हाला जस्ट ट्राईंग टू कोट वन sentence, what he says, and that quote captures the objective and the praxis of Maoists. And this is what he said, and I quote, "The parliamentary system does not suit our country. The only solution to it is to follow the path of Naxalbari and free ourselves from these semi-colonial forces, paving way to a real democracy, and you can't fight it without taking arms in your hand." Three things are important here. One, according to Varavarara Rao, the parliamentary democracy is not suited for India. That means that is not the real democracy. The real democracy will come once there is a revolution. And you cannot get to that real democracy unless you take arms. Now, is this, he's not saying that now we'll try evolutionary ways, आम्ही निवडणुका लढवू, आम्ही अमुक करू, आणि जर का नाही झालं तर मग कदाचित आम्ही शस्त्र घेऊ. अशा हा संकोच किंवा हे कन्फ्युजन कुठेही माओवाद्यांमध्ये नाही. And this is something he said in 1990. This stands true even today. 2004 नंतर तुम्हाला सगळ्यांना फ्रीली अवेलेबल आहे माओइस्ट डॉक्युमेंट्स. साऊथ एशियन टेररिझम पोर्टलवरती जर आपण गेला तर सगळी रिपॉझिटरी ओपनली अवेलेबल आहे. And if you go there, you will see all documents freely available there. So again, violence is not the last resort. Violence is the first and integral component in the political strategy for Maoists. So फक्त विचारधारेची लढाई नाही आहे. त्या विचारधारेला, आणि गंमत कशी आहे की यू हॅव एन आयडियोलॉजी, दॅट्स फाईन, बट देर इज एन आयडियोलॉजिकल कन्फॉर्मिटी. मिनिंग की जोपर्यंत तुम्ही ह्या विचारधारेला मान्य करत नाही तोपर्यंत तुम्ही योग्य दिशेने जात नाही. हा एक प्रकारचा अहम त्या ठिकाणी दिसतो. दिस आयडियोलॉजिकल कन्फॉर्मिटी इज अनदर प्रॉब्लेम. All right from Lenin, I mean, again, we have a tendency of glorifying Lenin in our popular discussions. He is one of the first persons who laid down the foundation of totalitarian states in India, in the world. But right from Lenin downwards, there is no hesitation of the fact that the only way is this way. You cannot fight people by any other means. You will have to use violence, and unless and until there is a socialist state, you cannot escape or you cannot come to what they say is a real democracy or people's democracy. So, first there is ideological conformity, there is willingness to use violence and brute force, and third, complete disapproval of any alternative methods. Means, now you cannot negotiate with them. तुम्ही त्यांच्यासोबत negotiate करू शकत नाही. Obviously you can negotiate tactically. Small term games साठी तुम्ही negotiate करा. But you cannot, because they are not going to agree unless and until we change to a, and even, I mean, it's for us to decide, but do we want to move to a system like the one which exists in China or the one which existed during Lenin and Stalin? Certainly not. I mean, our conception of democracy will not permit us to even think the kind of system that exists there. But the ideological conformity actually blindfolds everyone else to see. I don't know, मला त्या online channels आठवत नाही. Recently एक online ते web portals असतात त्याच्यामध्ये सीताराम येचुरी यांचा इंटरव्ह्यू झालेला आहे आणि त्याच्यामध्ये फार पद्धतशीरपणे जो मुलाखत घेत होता त्यांनी विचारलं की मग चायना हे टोटॅलिटेरियन स्टेट आहे का तुमच्यामध्ये, इज चायना टोटॅलिटेरियन स्टेट? आणि त्याचं उत्तर जे सीताराम येचुरी देत आहेत आपल्याला लक्षात येईल, हा इट इज पार्टली टोटॅलिटेरियन, पार्टली नॉट, सो ऑन अँड सो फोर्थ. सो it's okay for them to say, because, and by the way, Sitaram Yechuri is not a Maoist, I'm just clarifying here, don't take it that way. We have a very different section of communist parties also. The point that I'm trying to draw here is that there is certain value attached to the kind of states that are created in China and earlier erstwhile in Soviet Union, and that's the objective. So no matter how far you negotiate with them, if that's the objective, Indian state is not going to go receive any scope to that, and the Maoists are not going to give any ground to. So this is, what was that dialogue from Batman, when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object? Hey, you are not going to negotiate any ground whatsoever. So this threat is going to sustain as long as it exists. So this is a peculiar nature of the threat. The objective is to overthrow the Indian state, use violence, whatever way that is possible, and eventually create what they say is a dictatorship of proletariat. Now this is again very theoretically explained, no secret about it. A dictatorship of proletariat is an intermediate state between the revolution and the eventual coming of communism, where it will be a one-party totalitarian state. This is theoretically given, nothing that they want to create. It's not a coincidence that all post-revolution states are one-party states. Whether it is Soviet, whether it is Vietnam, whether it is Cuba, China, all of them are one-party states. It's not a coincidence, that's by design. Because you centralize power in one institution, and that's why it's the nature of that state is a totalitarian. Do we want such kind of system? Obviously not. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but obviously not. But this is the peculiar nature of the state or the movement that we are talking about. Now, if that's the objective, how are they planning to attain those objectives? Now, this is where I'm just going to give, sir, obviously, I've been given 30 to 14 minutes and I don't want to exceed that. So I'm just going to give you some glimpses in terms of what are the strategies through which Maoists have waged a battle against the Indian state and how they plan to do it in future as well. And which is where we have to slightly go back to Lenin and Mao to understand what they are saying. It's not possible to understand Indian Maoists without understanding what Lenin and Mao did. I mean, for those who have, I'm sure some of you would definitely have studied Marxism, and I'm not trying to reiterate all that, but Marx said that, there is a peculiar flow of society. Society moves from one state to the other, and in the process, the system of that state changes. So from feudalism, it moves to capitalism, and capitalism is the worst form. Because it's the worst form, there's going to be a revolution there, and that revolution will give rise to a socialist state, and socialist state will give rise to communism. Fairly simple. But Marx did not incorporate the possibility of an instigated revolution. That the revolution will be instigated from outside. Marx thought that it will be an organic way of coming to a new state. Lenin said that this is not going to happen. This organic revolution is not going to come. This spontaneous revolution is not going to come. You need to instigate the revolution. Why? Because there is no people, there's no class कॉन्शियस, लोकांना माहितीच नाही की त्यांचं शोषण होत आहे, तर आपल्याला लोकांना पटवावं लागेल की त्यांचं शोषण होत आहे, म्हणून मगच ते एकत्र होऊन एक उठाव करतील. So we have to convince people that there is exploitation there, and that class consciousness will come in, and then only we will have. So two things Lenin did. One, he reformulated Marxism by saying that you need an external agency to create revolution. And second, Marx said that revolution will come in capitalist societies. Russia also, Tsarist Russia was not capitalist. It was industrially one of the backward societies. Then Lenin said, okay, imperialism is also a sufficient condition for revolution. So, in other words, Lenin reformulated Marxism to suit the Russian realities and provide an ideology for instigated revolution. He talks about two things. Firstly, he talks about a concept called professional revolutionaries. He said, उठाव आपल्याला करायचा आहे तो अकस्मात होणार नाही आहे, त्याच्यासाठी आपल्याला प्रयत्न करावा लागणार आहे. Professional revolution, he actually talks about devoted revolutionaries who will dedicate time to change the societal order. So professional revolutionaries and a vanguard, a political vanguard who will lead the masses. So Bolshevik party becomes the political vanguard. I don't want to go into the process of the revolution entirely, but the revolution happens, and post-revolution you see the new USSR, which was a socialist state. By the way, between that there was also a civil war, which again was the consequence of what happened immediately after revolution. But this is two things that Lenin did, that you need an outside instigation. Revolution is not going to come on its own. You need professional revolutionaries and you need a vanguard. Now coming to Mao, Lenin did first major intervention, and I'm saying intervention not in the theoretical sense, intervention in terms of how we are going to attain the how we are going to attain that revolution. Now Mao does the same thing. He says, okay, revolution is not going to come on its own, you need a political vanguard, but Lenin had talked about an imperial state. In Lenin's time, the Russia, it was a Tsarist Russia, imperial state, and industrial workers from the urban spaces will contribute for the revolution. Mao said that China then was not even industrial society. China was an agrarian society, so there was no industrial setup whatsoever. So Mao said, okay, even in an agrarian society, you can have a revolution. Here, the people would be the agrarian peasants. The peasants will form the vanguard for the revolution whatsoever. So from imperialism, now we've come back to agrarian societies. And why Mao is significant? Because the Indian Maoists have adopted primarily the ideas, strategies and tactics that were incorporated by Mao Zedong in China. Because India also was an agrarian society, we had peasants. Our realities obviously were closer to China than they were to Russia. So from Lenin, there is a development in Mao, and from Mao Zedong, it is. But another important thing which Mao Zedong did, and this is something which is important for us, is Mao Zedong talks about a protracted people's war. The meaning of a protracted people's war is a war which is a long-lasting, something which will you have no idea about the end game of that war. Because in the case of Mao Zedong, there was nationalist China, there were also imperial powers, both of them were extremely powerful. So एवढ्या मोठ्या शत्रूला तुम्हाला उत्तर द्यायचं असेल तर ते जे संघर्ष आहे तो युद्ध असणार आहे तो it's going to be long in time and space. It's going to be protracted. This is something that we have also. So तुम्ही जर का CPI Maoists चे documents वाचले तर आपल्याला लक्षात येईल. They also talk about protracted people's war to usher in what they say a new democratic revolution. So from Lenin we go to Mao. माओनी परत दोन गोष्टी केल्या. He said that agrarian societies मध्ये पण revolution येऊ शकतं, and तुमचं जे revolution असणार आहे, you prepare yourself for a long battle. It's not going to be a short battle. You will have to fight guerrilla war, you will have to fight all different kinds of tactics, you will have to, in fact, Mao Zedong talks about 3 stages for revolution. And त्याच्यामध्ये एक stage is when you are very weak, your state is very strong, then you will have to lay down, you will have to be docile, you don't have to be in front of your state, and once you are able to recoup yourself, then you can again come back with vengeance. So Mao Zedong आधीपासून incorporate केलेलं आहे की there is going to be time when you are going to go down, you will have to stay low then. So from Marx, the theoretical foundation is of Marx, the praxis part essentially gets reformulated in Lenin, later on with Mao, and Indian Maoists have then therefore clubbed the three, the Marx, Lenin and Mao, in order to create a similar movement in India. But remember two things. Indian Maoist struggle, unlike let's say China, where anti-imperial struggle and the Maoist struggle or the communist struggle was almost coterminous. In case of Lenin, again it was coterminous. In Indian case, the major party which fought the anti-imperial struggle was Indian National Congress, and therefore the communist revolt per se was on the margins. It was not the main fray idea, unlike in Russia or in China as well. So that is a slight difference in India. But when it comes to India, you will see that these three strategies are very innovatively incorporated by Indian Maoists. In fact, in 1967, when the first Naxalbari revolt happened, the party which formed after that was CPI Marxist-Leninist. So there was a major Shiism, jab to uthao zala. See, Indian communist movement, and now I am using communist movement in totality, not just the revolutionary movement, but the Indian communist movement had peculiarities of its own. In fact, the Indian communist movement during the course of independence and also later on made peace with the democracy, which was in tune with the evolutionary socialism that was developing in the West. Bharatatल्या Communist Paksha, this is the first time in history that the Communist Party was elected through elections in India in 1957 in Kerala. Nowhere in the world has Communist Party was elected before that. So Indian Communists therefore adopted a line that we will participate in parliamentary processes and we will move accordingly. But in 1967, when the Naxalbari revolt happened, there was a Shiism. There were people said that should we support this revolt or should we still adopt the constitutional ways? And those people who said that no, we need violent revolutionary revolt started their front, which was the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist. And from there onwards, we have a long tradition of revolutionary Maoists who have rejected Indian state and have waged a violent struggle to overthrow that. So when this separation happened, one thing was clear, that whatever problems that India was facing can be solved only through the violent insurrection. It cannot be solved through parliamentary. Otherwise, they would have remained with the Communist Party, mainstream Communist Party. They detached themselves precisely on the ground that they will solve only through bullet and not through ballot. So it's not violence as a last resort. This is a design which they wanted to adopt. And second important thing which happened was, there was a proliferation of revolutionary ideas after first Naxalbari revolt. Of course, that Naxalbari revolt was crushed somewhere in 1973, 74 or thereabouts. And if you look at the nature of Maoist movement in India, you will see that the Maoist movement has faced one perennial problem, and that is factionalism. They have never been able to keep together the different revolutionary ideas together. So CPI-ML was formed, then it splintered into different groups, then there was a People's War group formed, and then there has been Maoist Communist Center, so on and so forth. There have been n number of splinter groups professing the same ideas, but some were not able to get along with each other, something which benefited Indian state, because then responding them was relatively easy. But as the splinter groups realized that you cannot fight the Indian state by such mechanisms, there was a lot of intellectual churning that happened in the decades of 90s and in 2000 about how to now go ahead with because if you go and read the literature of late 1990s, you will see the similar kind of optimism. The Maoist movement was going down. There was the people were also quite scattered, and there was no force of the Maoist movement as it existed once. But in 2004, a major breakthrough happens for the Maoists, and that is the creation of CPI Maoist, the Communist Party of India Maoist, which was formed in 2004, and that was formed by merging together various splinter groups and becoming, so right now, CPI Maoist is the vanguard of the violent movement for creating an alternative state. So 2004, CPI Maoist gets formed, and after that you will see a new, it was in a sense an inflection point of Maoist movement in India. In a sense, after 2004, it changed the track. It worked on a lot of its inadequacies there were before. 2004 नंतर त्यांचे strategies, त्यांचं public outreach, their mechanism in working in different areas all started in a very different fashion. In fact, 2004 नंतर आपल्याला जी माओवादी चळवळ दिसते, ही बऱ्याच प्रमाणात बदललेली दिसते, आणि the expanse of that movement was, so when Mao said that we will have a revolution from agricultural agrarian lands, peasants will be the primary people who will revolt, he concentrated on rural areas, and from rural areas they will go and capture the cities. That is what the strategy was. Indian Maoists also adopted that we will have primarily the rural bases from where we will have the recruits, and from there onwards we will charge onto the urban areas. Unlike Lenin, who thought urban areas were primarily important because industrial labor was in urban areas. After 2004, we see that changes. After 2004, there is no hierarchy that first rural and then urban. After 2004, they have concentrated on rural and urban areas alike. This is written in fact, all of you can go and read. There's a document called Strategy and Tactics of Indian Maoists. It's available online. It's a very detailed document, and they have given all the strategies they are going to use in order to usher in new democratic revolution. So after 2004, they increased their space, they increased their time, and they've changed the strategies to respond to Indian state. म्हणून 2004 नंतर म्हणजे so much so ki I think in 2007 and 8 when US came up with a study, they designated CPI Maoists as the 4th dangerous terrorist organization in the world. In terms of violence they were able to inflict, in terms of radicalization they were able to achieve, and in terms of penetration they had on different levels of society, the CPI Maoist had become an extremely formidable force. आणि जर का तुम्ही 2010 आणि त्या काळातले जर का आकडे बघितले तर you will see that the violence had reached its peak. This is the time when Manmohan Singh said that this is the single biggest threat. Why? Because unlike, let's say, parts of Northeast where you can identify one problem, there are certain problems for certain groups, you can address that politically. Here you cannot address it politically because your politics itself is divergent. And this is going to continue as an ideological war. And after 2004, it peaked at 2010. But after, there is another subtext. म्हणजे बरेचदा लोक म्हणतात की माओवादाला इन्सर्जन्सी म्हणायचं की टेररिझम म्हणायचं, एक अकॅडमिक डिबेट आहे. आणि theoretically जर का आपण म्हटलं तर आपण म्हणतो की इन्सर्जन्सी इज प्रायमरीली अगेन्स्ट द स्टेट. It has a clear-cut distinction between combatants and non-combatants, and there is a genuine cause for which, or at least there is some legitimacy to the cause for the insurgency. Just do a small exercise. All the figures are available online. The number of civilian deaths in the Maoist violence exceeds the number of deaths in the security forces, on and off. So there is a lot of civilians. There is no clear-cut distinction between civilian and non-civilian. If you look at the parallel governments that Maoists have established, they had established one point in time. I have my doubts to call it an insurgency or not. But even the civilian deaths are extremely high in the Maoist-related violence. They peaked somewhere in 2010, and after that they have substantially reduced. From 2013 onwards they have substantially reduced. So now, where we are now is that the material component of Maoism, that is the people who are, so either the Maoist individuals who are leading, by the way, Maoist, I'm saying CPI Maoist as a political party, but it's a political party, yes, but it's an entire organized war machinery. They have their People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, they have their intelligence unit, they have their commando unit. It's a well-organized war machine, and they have all designated roles for each of these organizations. But this relative strength of this organization may be dwindling. That's when probably Home Minister said that we have been able to achieve certain success. That the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army warriors have either been surrendering or have they been arrested or at times eliminated? Their penetration has gone substantially low, so on and so forth. So the material aspect of the Maoists have been substantially controlled. But there is an interesting argument, which is, what about the ideational part of the Maoists? How do you deal with that? And this is where something that because this is something state can't do. In the security studies domain, we identify this kind of warfare as a hybrid warfare. And hybrid warfare is when you do not have a conventional armies fighting in the battlefield, but a hybrid warfare happens for the control of civil society. The hybrid warfare happens to control and radicalize and insinuate, penetrate the ideas within the civil society, and who controls that. One of the dimensions of hybrid warfare is that. And right now, Maoist struggle is somewhere directed towards that. There is a movement to penetrate the civil society organizations and exploit the fault lines which exist within our society and use them for the political struggle for Indian Maoists. And this is again something which is very well written by Maoists themselves. In fact, in 2007, also they came up with a document wherein they have identified organizations. So in the common parlance, we will call them mass organizations. Maoists call them as mass organizations, which work within the civil society groups, identify the fault lines, and exploit those fault lines for the political struggle. Now, this is something which is a major challenge, which is why I said that you may root out the material dimension of Maoism, but this is something far more insidious and diabolic, and something which we will have. In fact, in 2019 or 18, there was this document there was this party pamphlet which the CPI Maoist popularized. They were celebrating some 18 or 19 years of formation of CPI Maoist as a party. And I'm just giving an instance what they said. And this is what firstly they were talking about, they were taking the stock of Maoist activities across India. And this is what they said, and I quote, that the Maoist party assessed in 2021, January, that several people's movement going on in the country for past 5 years shall develop into a country-wide spate of people's movement. In other words, according to Maoists, there are certain movements. Let's say, here they are referring to two. The protest against the Agniveer scheme and the farm protest that happened across India. And these two schemes, and this is what they specifically refer to, that the Maoists have been successfully infiltrated into farmers' agitations against the farm laws, and we have to develop a people's spate movement of similar kind so that it becomes a people's movement for Maoists as well. Now, there was a lot of controversy when people say that, why are you delegitimizing the genuine protests that are happening in farm laws? The protests may be genuine, I'm not discarding that. But these genuine protests are becoming a theatres for political strategies for Maoists. Something which and this is what they themselves have written about. And further, they go on to say that we have to identify similar movements, we have to penetrate those movements and use it for political struggle. And which is why I said in the beginning that are Maoists interested in responding to state operation? Not. They are not. They are interested in exploiting these fault lines to benefit their political objective. And this is going to be extremely problematic scenario. This is something I don't want to go into further details in terms of how this is happening. Probably we can, if there is Q&A, we can take up there. But this is one of the trends which is far more visible right now, and this dimension of Maoism, this is that buffer zone which Maoists probably are contemplating now. That right now we cannot fight a frontal war. We need to expand the political base of CPI Maoists. That can be expanded when we have more recruits, and they're using these fault lines to recruit their people and using these fault lines to generate. So, it's easy in a democratic setup like India to get into certain political movements and then use it. I mean, it's very difficult to distinguish a genuine protest from the other. But, there is difference. There is a difference, protest within Indian democracy, and there is a protest against Indian democracy. Maoists are engaged into protest against Indian democracy by exploiting the fault lines within the society. This is, I think, is going to endure for foreseeable future. We cannot predict how to, obviously this is where state can't do anything. We can't go on stopping protests because we think that it can be infiltrated by Maoists. That's certainly not going to happen. In fact, this is something which will be even more intricately problematic for the state. How do you find out, and more importantly, and it is good that in a democracy, we cannot accuse someone for thinking, so I can't be accused for supporting a Maoist ideology. It's not possible. I will be accused or I will be criminalized if I engage into a Maoist act. But how to separate one from the other? And this is where a lot of controversy is. Supporting and engaging, it's a very thin line, it's a very problematic idea, and this is where I think it's going to be extremely, which is why, I would like to be an optimist, but I'm also a realist, which is why it's true that the situation in left-wing extremism has been substantially controlled, but this factor, there's a lot of political politicization of this issue. Whether Maoists are there in civil society organization or not, is it discrediting the genuine protest? All that controversy has its merit. I'm not discarding that. I'm just trying to emphasize on the point that there are these fault lines which are being exploited by the Maoists, and as a society we should be aware of the fact that yes, this is happening. And we can't turn our eyes blind to that by just saying that this is just a protest and it's right for everyone to protest. Of course it is a right, but we have to understand that this can be exploited as well. In fact, I would end with an affidavit which was submitted by the UPA government in 2023, which captures this idea which I'm trying to sort of put forth, that Maoist violence or Maoist threat is not just a material threat. Maoist threat is also an ideological threat. You have to fight it by understanding what their designs are and responding to it through ideological spectrum also. It can't just be response by the state. And right now, this is a more pertinent phase in Maoism than what was there in 2010. In 2010, it was a fairly armed struggle. Right now, that has subsided and the other dimension has come up. So this is what, in fact, the UK government in 2013 submitted an affidavit to Supreme Court. And this is what it said, quote, ideologues and supporters of CPI Maoist party in cities and towns have undertaken a concerted and systematic propaganda against the state to project the state in poor light and also malign it through disinformation. And this is, the next part is far more informative for us. It goes on to say that in fact, it is these ideologues who have kept the movement alive and are in many ways more dangerous than the cadres of People's Liberation Guerrilla Army. So the military wing, which is actually fighting the war, gets its legitimacy from this overground work which is done by the ideologues. And what is that work? To delegitimize Indian state, to delegitimize Indian democracy, to use existing fault lines to benefit their parochial political agendas, and use it for a protracted people's war. All these four are written strategies of CPI Maoists. There's nothing secret about it. But this is far more problematic, and right now I think we are in that phase. I hope our Home Minister is right in his assessment that he has been able to tackle the ideological front as well. But as a caution, I think we have to be vigilant on that front as well. I think I'll stop here, and I'm happy to engage with the questions. Thank you.